Hello everybody, and welcome to the amazing regenerative power of sleep. I'm your host tonight, Dr. Dave Winiarowski, and many of you know me from previous teleconferences that we've done. This is a little bit of a switch tonight, so fasten your seatbelts and turn off your cell phones. I've got something really cool tonight in a very, very special guest who's quite famous in the sleep world and quite famous throughout the world in general. But I'm not going to tell you who it is just yet. You got to stick around for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I will bring him on. But one of the things that I plan on doing, and this is kind of in keeping with my next book that I've been working on since the first book. Those of you who have read the first book, it was published in 2010. It was called The Immortality Edge. I had two co-authors, so Dr. Michael Fossil, who is really the godfather of the telomere theory of aging in my book, and Greta Blackburn, who's a pioneering person in the field as well. And we released this book way back in 2010, and I've been trying to write the follow-up ever since, and I got to tell you, it's been tough. But the cool thing is, along the way, I decided that I would integrate other experts. I would get some help. Because, you know, writing a book, when you write 90–95% of it yourself, it's tough. And the field changes so rapidly, and there are so many people with such really, really good and interesting information that is relevant to my favorite topic, how to stay young and healthy longer. And I got to tell you also that once you're done with this, you'll know two big topics a lot better. Number one, why you should never skip sleep. And number two, what to do about it when you're faced with some choices. So as always, we're going to have to do a few little housekeeping details. So Patrick, if you would move to the next slide. I'll sum it up for you. Everything I tell you here is my own opinion. It's not a medical opinion. It is not approved by the FDA, the FTC, the AMA, any alphabet agency, and you alone hold the responsibility for the use, misuse, or non-use of this information. Consider it for entertainment and educational purposes only. And since I mentioned that we're going to have a guest speaker, and we will have throughout the rest of this year an occasional guest speaker, please understand that these folks are appearing of their own volition, but their appearance does not necessarily mean they agree with every single thing I say, nor does it constitute a de facto endorsement of any of my products. Okay, next slide, please. Some more housekeeping details. I do represent a publicly traded company. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Biostem Technologies, and what you are to get from this slide is that there's nothing in this talk that you should interpret as inside information, as stock information, or any kind of enticement to get you to buy our stock. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm a medical and scientific person, and I've now given you every single thing I know about the stock market in that one summated sentence there. So this isn't for you to buy our stock. Just pay attention to this. This is for entertainment and education, and I, of course, hope it improves your life as well. Okay, let's move to the next slide. All right. I want to give you a functional definition of sleep because there's so many ways you can represent sleep. You can talk about it physiologically, biochemically, you can talk about it in all kinds of contexts. But I want to talk to you about it in the functional context. And I hope by this relatively short and quite limited list, because it goes way beyond the things that I have listed here, I hope you understand why it's a really bad idea to not sleep. You know, what's the first thing people give up? It's sleep. I've heard people say, well, you know, I didn't sleep well, but I'll just eat a little bit better today and that'll make up for it. Not really. Okay, I didn't sleep so well, but I'm going to hit the gym really hard and that'll make up for it. No, it won't. This is one of those things that we mentioned way back in 2010 in the Immortality Edge. It was one of what I believe turned out to be 6 or 7 pillars of lifestyle that you really, really need to integrate. And because we don't have the magic pill or the magic shot or the magic gene that's going to reverse aging and make us all live a lot longer yet, what we have to do is we have to practice everything So it's an integrated system. Regenerative medicine, anti-aging medicine is an integrated system. Okay, I've got folks out there who are on all my supplements, who take them religiously, who exercise, who followed specific dietary regimes or regimens. They get stem cells and they take telomerase activators and they take what I consider are normal quantities of fish oil, 4 to 6 grams a day. Monitor their levels. They do everything right, but they don't sleep. They're shortchanging themselves. They're shortchanging themselves to a degree that, frankly, it's not going to negate everything else they do. But why would you do all those things and leave this one gigantically important thing out there? And I'm going to make a comment that is probably going to be a little bit controversial, but let me go through this list just so you get the context and the background. I should also tell you, by the way, that we're going to try to divide this talk into two main subdivisions. The first division is why it's so important for you to sleep and its effect on aging, its effect on your body. This is to try to remind you and convince you with powerful medically derived, at least, arguments that you shouldn't skip this and you should make it a priority along with eating and exercise. So the next time you're tempted to watch the Tonight Show, turn off the TV. The next time you're tempted to stay up late and drink a cup of coffee at 8 p.m., don't do it. The next time you reach for that midnight snack, don't do it, because it's going to affect the way you sleep. And the way you sleep, especially over the long term, but even in the short run, is going to affect how your body ages and how your body functions. So functionally speaking, what is sleep? Well, it's a chance for your brain to regenerate. And I'll lump that in with a chance to your body to regenerate. The regenerative processes that occur during the body, many of them occur during rest. That's the time when our body takes that extra 7, 8 hours, if you will, to rebuild, replenish, and repair. And you can see this in the metabolic shifts. Now, even though our metabolism goes down, there's some very specific shifts in what happens. Protein metabolism, fat metabolism, we're going to talk about hormones in a little bit. All these things are intimately related to your sleep cycles and intimately affected by your sleep cycles. The brain itself is very, very active during certain parts of sleep. And it uses this to not only regenerate itself physically, but also to integrate things like memory and to learn from experiences. And again, we'll touch on this again when we speak about memory specifically. But your brain needs sleep. It absolutely has to. And any time that you've gone through lack of sleep for any length of time, whether it be 1 night or 10 nights, you know very, very clearly what I'm saying. A chance for your body to regenerate. Some of you out there are hardcore athletes, but you skimp on sleep. You're shortchanging your athletic routines. Some of you are weekend warriors. Some of you are couch potatoes, and some of you are desk jockeys. All these things, whether it's sedentary behavior or athletic behavior, are better with sleep. Your body needs to regenerate. Now, I don't advocate sedentary behavior. I advocate an active lifestyle, as you know. But if you're trying to build muscle, if you're trying to build endurance, and you don't sleep, your body will not regenerate the way it should. It uses that downtime, that paralysis of sleep, if you will. And again, not all sleep stages are paralyzed, but many of them are. And during this time, your body has the chance to rebuild and replenish. And if you were to delve deeply into the metabolic mysteries of the body, you would see that protein metabolism and anabolism, or muscle building, occurs primarily at nighttime. It's a chance for your memories and lessons to be integrated. Now, I'm not going to get into the different types of memory, such as declarative memory and the other types, but the stages of sleep that you go through, and right now there are probably 5 recognized, depending on how you divide it. Some people just divide it into non-REM and REM. That's 2 stages. But however you divide that sleep map, your memories and lessons are integrated during that. And certain types of sleep, for instance, REM is different than the other areas of sleep in terms of what types of memories are built. So you cannot shortchange yourself. And when our special guest comes on, I'm going to ask him a very specific question about sleep and shortchanging, but there's a popular myth by some biohackers out there that you can track your sleep and you can interrupt it at this time, and that may work for 1 or 2 nights, but don't listen to that stuff long term. That's a big mistake. Unfortunately, most people will eventually just feel so lousy doing it that they say, okay, that didn't work, and they get on. But it's amazing what people can put into print and get away with, and sell lots of books and affect the lives of lots of people in what I think is a negative fashion. If you want a good memory, you've got to be able to have all of sleep, including REM and non-REM. REM is rapid eye movement sleep, and non-REM is everything else. It's a chance to balance or unbalance your hormones. Of all the things that have gotten a lot of press just lately, it's the effect of hormones on aging. Now, way back in 1996, there was an agency, if you will, formed called the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. It's grown and grown. It's got thousands of doctors worldwide. I've been a member since 2002. And the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine initially came out with one primary therapy. It was the thing that everybody focused on anyway. It was hormone balancing for men and women. And of course, it's been harder and harder to do. I did it for a while in my own internal medicine practice, but it just got to be a royal PIA, if you know what I mean. The laws changed, people started scrutinizing it, and of course, along come the drug companies with their magic patches and creams, which they want you to use instead of bioidentical stuff. And so they try to discredit hormone replacement the way we practiced it, which was bioidentical. Lo and behold, recent advances in science have included the study of telomeres, which is the biologic time clock, and stem cells. We now know that hormone replacement is an integral part of keeping the telomeres healthy, and probably also the stem cells, although that's lagging just a teeny tiny little bit behind. That's going to probably come out in the next 1 to 2 years. So keep your eyes nearest the ground for that one. It took many, many years. It's still not 100% proven, but we're getting closer and closer to proving that when you balance your hormones, you do wonderful things to the biologic time clocks, you improve the oxidative stress mechanisms of your body, and in a sense, you de-age. Now, once again, when I use the word de-age, anti-aging, regenerative medicine, these are not terms that are accepted by the FTC, the AMA, the FDA. These, again, are for your educational purposes only. And when I talk about aging and non-aging, all I can really tell you is what I do. And I can simply say you might want to pay attention for your own interest and education and entertainment, of course. But watch this space. Watch the space of hormones and aging, because it's going to explode once again on the scientific field. Now, tissue repair I alluded to, but there's more to it than just simple rebuilding and repair and protein anabolism. There's immunity, there's muscle growth. This is insulin secretion. If you don't think that sleep is important for insulin secretion, you are wrong. If you don't think that sleep is important for your immunity, you are wrong. So you have people who go out and do all these wonderful things. They eat right, they exercise right, but they don't sleep, and they get sick. And I don't understand. Why did I get sick? Well, guess what you neglected? You neglected one of the most important cornerstones of the anti-aging regenerative medicine lifestyle, which is sleep. Okay, and again, I stress muscle growth. A lot of athletes on this call, a lot of people who want to, become better athletes at different stages of their life. Muscle growth and endurance, you can't do them if you're not sleeping. Try it sometime. Go out and take a long run after you haven't slept. You might get away with it once, but if you do it more than 1 or 2 nights in a row, you're going to fall apart. It's also bad for your oxidative stress mechanisms, and of course, it's not good for your telomeres. Very simply put, sleep is integration or disintegration. And at the cornerstone of this, as with so many of the things we talk about in aging, is inflammation. Lack of sleep is inflammatory. And it's not just because you don't repair things and you accumulate damage. It's because a whole series of epigenetic and genetic mechanisms come into play. Genes are transcribed that are potentially harmful for you, that negate some of your body's repairability. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, much like you've heard me talk about aging becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in case you missed that back on the telomere and the stem cell talk, it's very germane, it's very important to what I'm going to talk to you about with sleep. So let me just give you the thing in a nutshell. When you age, inflammation crops up in your body. It's sterile inflammation. It's not because of an infection. It is because of an accumulation, most likely, of damaged cells that are secreting inflammatory chemical messengers. Over time, these accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. They cause damage to things like your stem cell population. They cause damage to your biologic time clocks, called your telomeres. They change the way your genes are expressed, and they give you the phenotype or the physical appearance and behaviors of an aged person, even though your genes may not be changed that much. That is the epigenetic or non-genetic regulation of the aging process. And sleep plays into this directly. Sleep, or lack of sleep I should say, poor sleep also, that is sleep that's not cyclic and doesn't put you in a couple of cycles of that wonderful 90 minutes per cycle that you need to go through the 4 or 5 cycles of sleep, or if you prefer non-REM and REM sleep. You're supposed to have 4 or 5 of those a night. If you don't get those, it's going to be inflammatory. It's going to contribute to the aging process. All right, let's go to the next slide, and then I'm going to make this controversial statement I promised. One of the things that I've seen in the news media a lot recently is this hue and cry on we are overprescribing painkillers and certain dangerous drugs. Now, it takes the death of someone like Michael Jackson and Prince for this to come to the forefront. That's why we're seeing it. There's no other way of saying it. A couple superstars overdose, and now you've got yourself a national epidemic. Well, it was a national epidemic before. It didn't happen just because those 2 people passed away. But now the news media is turning their eyes to it. Michael Jackson basically died because of a drug called propofol. Prince was using something called fentanyl. These are hypnotics. These are anesthetic drugs. These are not drugs that you would walk down to your local pharmacy and say, hey, I'd like some fentanyl or propofol, please. Your pharmacist would raise an eyebrow, and of course, it's always the doctor's fault, but somebody's sending those drugs out of the pharmacy. Somehow they're getting there. So my point to you is with this is that the focus may be a little bit misplaced. I'm showing you a slide right now that says that 20% or more fatal machine-based accidents are rooted in sleep deprivation. That is where there's somebody left to tell the tale. Somebody who knew what was going on with the person who passed away, or the person himself who caused the accident and said, oh my gosh, I didn't sleep last night, it messed me up. Look what I did. Look what terrible thing happened. Okay, 20% or more, and again, it's probably more like 35%. My own brother was probably the victim of sleep. He was 27 years old when he died, and as near as we can tell, he fell asleep at the wheel, hit a bridge, his car exploded, and he was killed instantly. So I have a very, very personal relationship with sleep deprivation. I don't want this to happen to you. I don't want this to happen to anybody else. It's okay, we have all these sleep-inducing drugs out there. Where is the news media attacking, or at least bringing to the educational forefront, the damages of lack of sleep? How it may shorten your life. It's pretty hard to live a long, healthy life if you wind up as a statistic in the obituary column. So please keep this in mind. It's not just about longevity, it's about traumatic deaths as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Some specifics now, because we have a lot of people who want to know what are the habits, what types of habits. And again, when our guest star joins us, we will have another opportunity to revisit these. Some of the questions I get asked a lot are, how does eating affect sleep? How does sleep affect eating? And then some of these other things we'll cover individually. Let me talk about eating and sleep. First of all, your mother told you don't eat after 8 o'clock. That's probably a good rule. Now, I know there are certain societies where the sleep cycles are different, the work cycles are different. You know, in Spain they usually eat at 10 o'clock to midnight, but their work cycle is different, and they spend probably a similar or more time sleeping, and of course there's the infamous or famous siesta. So timing your eating so that you don't eat too late in the evening is very, very important. Once again, I alluded to the midnight snack. Don't grab the midnight snack. Go to bed hungry. You'll wake up not hungry, believe it or not. If you want more information on that, go to my ketogenic diet blogs on Dr. Dave Unleashed. But it's amazing what happens to your hormones and your metabolism. So resist that temptation for late night eating. If you have a sleep disorder, meaning you're having trouble sleeping, as opposed to a sleep disease, okay, like something like sleep apnea, a sleep disorder, meaning you can't sleep or you can't stay asleep, try not eating after 5 p.m. Even if you get a little hungry at nighttime, you'll sleep a lot better. How does sleep affect eating? Well, let's bump down to sleep deprivation and obesity. Most of the hormones that are secreted, especially those that are only secreted once or twice a day, have a peak around 4 a.m. If you mess up your sleep cycles, you mess up that hormonal secretion, and you mess up the thermostats that are affected by that. In your brain, there's an area called hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is where most of the thermostatic functions of the brain are located. And it is very much affected by how you sleep. The cycle of sleep and awake, much like a flower opening or closing, affects the hormones of a person, much like a flower opening or closing does. If you look at flowers, it's a lot easier to study them than it is people. But they have diurnal variations and different daily cycles they follow to open and close, when they're most fertile, when they're least fertile, etc. This is the same thing with people, and it's completely, or almost completely, determined by the hypothalamic functions of these thermostats. And one thermostat that's in there is your fat stat, how much body fat you carry. Another is your water stat, your weight stat, and your appetite stat. All of these are located in that hypothalamus. If you have sleep deprivation, you will have a tendency to eat more. You will have a tendency to eat more carbohydrates. You'll have a tendency to have more inflammation in your body, and you'll have a tendency to become more obese. Let's move on now to sleep deprivation and infertility. You know, I attend a lot of conferences on anti-aging medicine, both lay public conferences and doctor conferences. And you get a litany of people getting up there and saying it's the xenoestrogens, it's the toxins, it's the stuff that are on receipts, it's the stuff in the air, it's the stuff in the water, it's all this stuff that's making us less fertile, because in the past 60 years, especially if you look at sperm count in men, it's dropped. So there's a fertility issue that seems to be happening in the past 6 decades or so. Now, is it all those things? Is it xenoestrogens? Yes. Is it diet? Yes. Is it pollutants and toxins? Yes. But there's a very, very interesting correlation, and that is the slow but steady increase, if you will, in sleep deprivation. We are more sleep deprived now than ever, and that curve parallels the fertility curve. So once again, when we look at all these other things, and people have made entire careers, you know, it's artificial sweeteners, it's the stuff on receipts, don't touch the receipts, don't touch the plastic, don't do this, don't do that, don't eat this, don't eat that. How about starting with a good night's sleep? That would be a really good place to start to affect your fertility. And once again, I think our special guest, who will hopefully be arriving, will have something to say about that. Here's another big one: sleep deprivation and task completion and focus. And I'm going to lump it in with the next one: depression, anger, and rage. Your ability to focus and your mood are intimately involved in sleep. Very, very much directed at how well you sleep, the types of stages of sleep that you have, and also how long you sleep, how many cycles of sleep that you go through. So, this is really, really important. I talked to you very briefly about what I think is a national health problem, and that's sleep deprivation. I talked to you about accidents that happen because of sleep deprivation. I talked to you about hormones and obesity. These are all things we look at epidemics, infertility. Everybody's pointing the finger at everything but sleep. And I had a very interesting conversation with our special guest about this, and we were both shocked. You know, I've been shouting from the lonely pulpit of sleep deprivation for 15 years, and this individual who makes a living this way and is a world-class expert, world-renowned sleep expert, was like, "You're kidding me. The anti-aging regenerative medicine doctors don't talk about this?" Not really. What about sleep and depression, anger, and rage? Clearly there's a direct correlation between mood. Just try not sleeping for a couple nights like I did in med school. Then you're supposed to go out and take care of sick, dead, and dying people. Not a good combination, folks. And as you know, some of those laws have changed finally after literally centuries of certain types of behavior that rewarded sleep deprivation. Imagine a physician being sleep deprived because it's the brave thing to do. It's the manly thing to do. Unbelievable, but this is what we were taught. Anger and rage, it's very difficult to control your moods. I wonder how many marriages and how many childhoods and how many familial crises could have been improved, disasters averted, if people had slept more and gone to substance abuse less to make up for the lack of sleep, because that's one of the things that happens. People start abusing things. Number one sleep sedative is alcohol, and there's plenty of others out there as well. As you know, people use Benadryl, they use all the benzodiazepines, they use all kinds of things that the very same pharmaceutical industry that brought you propofol and fentanyl, which are triggering this rage against drug abuse. What about sleep drug abuse? Again, totally underrepresented. I told you about my brother's tragic passing. I'll admit to you that this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this. But it's also because I firmly believe you cannot live a long and healthy life if you don't sleep effectively. Okay, next slide. All right, quickly, hormonal, because I want to get to our special guest star tonight. Some things happen with aging. Cortisol goes up. Cortisol is your stress hormone. It tends to go up slowly and surely. Now, it doesn't go up to the levels of what's called Cushing's disease. It doesn't go up to the levels of cortisone and prednisone and steroid abuse. But it tends to go up because there seems to be this ongoing chronic inflammation, sterile inflammation, which I think is one of the root causes of aging. And I think it is intimately involved with the fact that another hormone drops, and that's melatonin. There is a whole system of looking at aging called the pause system, and it comes from the word menopause. Women, you may know this well. This is when you stop having your period. Well, there's somatopause. That's when your growth hormone secretion goes down. There's andropause, which is the male version of menopause. And then there's melanopause, which is when your melatonin starts going down. We see this as we age. We don't necessarily understand why it happens, but hormones are always a symphony. They're never a single isolated defect, and even if you have a thyroid problem or an adrenal problem, it's affecting your other hormones. Don't think otherwise. It's affecting your growth hormone and your sex hormones and all those other things. Telomeres. What is the effect of sleep and aging on telomeres? Well, we know that telomeres shorten with aging. We also know that disorders of sleep, which we're going to briefly talk about next, negatively affect the biologic time clock called the telomere. They shorten it. So disorders of sleep certainly shorten your life. What about just plain old garden variety lack of sleep? Well, there's no data on this yet, but I'm banking and I'm telling you that I'll step out on a limb here and tell you that if it's ever studied, and it should be, we will see that sleep deprivation, especially chronic sleep deprivation, because of its inflammatory potential, because of its changing the way our genes are transcribed, must shorten our telomeres and therefore shorten our lives. Oxidative stress, I talked to you about chronic sterile inflammation. I talked to you about the role of sleep in causing that to be a problem and exacerbating that. Add to that crappy diet, external stresses, sedentary behavior, and a complete imbalance in the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, and you've got yourself a recipe for accelerated loss of vital cellular tissues like telomeres. You've got yourself a recipe for changing the way the genes are transcribed. This is the epigenetic changes that happen, and you've got yourself a recipe for advanced aging, rapid aging, faster aging. Now, again, what I'm telling you is sort of true, and we're not sure yet. In other words, no one's actually looked at this stuff, but we've been circling these things on so many levels for so many years. It's time for somebody to come out and say it. If it has to be me, that's fine. I said it back in 2010 in the Immortality Edge, and so I don't mind being the scapegoat. People can make fun of me and people could say I stretch the data. People could say whatever they want about me. But in 10 years from now when all this data comes out, nobody's going to say, oh, that guy remembered. But at least you have the information and you can do something with it. And that's all I care about. I don't want you to wind up like my brother. Next slide, please. All right. Sleep apnea, more common than you think. We're seeing more and more of this as clinicians. I think it has to do with the insulation in the house. I think the houses are better insulated. I think the systems in our house, the heating and cooling systems, are more efficient. I think the air is drier, and I think there's probably also some more stuff that's leached out in all but the most modern homes as far as volatile organic solvents from some of the insulating materials. Your partner can tell you if you have sleep apnea. Pretty much what you're looking for is really loud snoring and then long pauses between breathing. And we're probably going to circle back at this in a little bit when I introduce our special guest. I talked to you about oxidative stress. The key to healthy aging, actually, it is very much managing that. And then the effect of lack of sleep and oxidative stress on telomeres and stem cells. We didn't talk a whole lot about stem cells, but telomeres and stem cells are the two single most important discoveries of intervening in the aging and health span process yet. And many of you have been on my other teleseminars and you understand how important they are. So I'm not going to rehash that too much except to tell you that if you mess with sleep, you mess negatively with these two things. Okay, drum roll please, and next slide. Here we go. All right, and this is it. I want to remind you, sleep, if you want to effectively stay young, you've got to learn how to sleep well. Now, learn how to sleep. Imagine that. Well, we're going to introduce somebody next who's going to help us fix some of our sleep problems. Hopefully, I've convinced you of the direct connections between immunity, oxidative stress, stem cell attrition, telomere loss, and all these other things that are intimately involved in aging and the lack of sleep. Hopefully, I've convinced you that sleep is the last thing you should give up. I would rather see you eat a crappy meal or skip a day at the gym than skip a good night's sleep. Sleep helps you stay young. Next slide, please. All right, ladies and gentlemen, finally, after listening to me jaw for 30 minutes, I want to introduce the sleep doctor, Dr. Michael Breus, PhD. Dr. Breus is an incredible individual I've had a chance to learn from, and I've had a chance to speak with at length. And he's written 2 best-selling books. He's had numerous television appearances. He's been on the Oprah show many, many times. And I like to call him America's Sleep Doctor, but he goes by the name of The Sleep Doctor. And Dr. Breus has got some really cool stuff coming up. Welcome, Dr. Michael Breus.
Thanks, Dr. Dave. How are you?
I'm super. Thank you for joining us. And sorry to make you listen to that long-winded diatribe, but as you know, I have some very personal and very passionate feelings. But let's talk about you a little bit.
Sure.
You've got some really cool stuff coming up. You've got a book coming out very shortly, which is on Amazon. People can pre-order it. I believe it's called The Power of When. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct, and it actually falls in line with a lot of your teachings about telomeres.
Oh, awesome. And so tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us about the upcoming summit and how folks can get involved with that.
Absolutely, but before I do that, I want to thank you for having me on this webinar. First of all, the information that you're giving has all been scientifically validated and accurate, so don't think that you're going out on the fringe there. While I can't say that I know much about sleep deprivation and telomeres yet, that is definitely something that you and I are going to have to explore much further together. And you know, your story about what happened to your brother, as tragic as it is unfortunately more common than we'd like to think. There are many, many people out there who are suffering from sleep deprivation from all kinds of sources, whether it's sleep apnea, whether it's environmental issues, whether it's stress, what have you. And it can have a devastational effect on people. I've been very fortunate to be on the Dr. Oz show, as you mentioned, quite a bit, and I've got a new book coming out in September called The Power of When. You know, most self-help books tell you what to do or they tell you how to do it. They don't tell you when to do it. And so this book is all about when in your day is the best time to do certain things at your optimal performance. So it turns out that everybody's got inside them a chronorhythm. Now, many of you have already heard of what some of these chronorhythms are. You've heard of people either being called an early bird or a night owl. Those are 2 of the chronorhythms. But it turns out that there are 2 others. One is that person that's in between those 2, which, by the way, makes up about 50% of people out there. But then there are the people who have insomnia, and they have a whole different chronorhythm. Once I know what your chronorhythm is, I know where all of your highs and lows are in terms of your neurotransmission, your cortisol, your melatonin, you name it, I can tell you where it is. And then depending upon what activity you want to do, I can tell you the best time of day to do it based on where I know your hormones are. I can tell you when to have sex, eat a cheeseburger, run a mile, talk to a therapist, ask your boss for a raise, you name it. And that's what the power of when is all about.
That's incredible, and I have it on pre-order. I can hardly wait. And I won't ask you to spill the beans on the chronotrope stuff, but I think probably it's going to come out a little bit in the little clinical vignettes.
Yes.
So let's jump to that if you're okay with that. And,
of course.
Let's not forget about the upcoming summit as well. So I'll make sure we circle back to that. But you know, as a clinician and a person who is clearly not the expert level that you are in sleep deprivation, I was often vexed by people coming in. And there are two things that when I was just a garden variety cocktail internist, the thing that I saw most was anxiety and exhaustion. And of course, sleep deprivation was right up there in that. So how do you approach a person who says, you know, doc, I just can't get to sleep at night? And then, of course, the corollary with that will be, I can't stay asleep. Let's talk about the person who has insomnia. What are some of the things that you look at?
So so when I do an interview with a patient, which usually takes about, somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes, I'm going through almost every aspect of their life. So one of the first things I look at is their medication sheet. Are they currently taking any medications where insomnia or hypersomnia, that fatigued feeling, could be a side effect? I look at their medical history. Do they have a history of an overactive thyroid or an underactive thyroid? Are they anemic? Do we know that they have any inflammatory markers like a C-reactive protein or things of that nature? I look at vitamin D. I look at magnesium. I look at all these different things to think, gosh, what could be going on? And here, let me tell you what I find is maybe 30-35% of the time I find an external factor that is causing their insomnia. 65 to 70% of the time, what I find is that there's a level of stress, which I'm calling anxiety or depression, that is fueling that inability to fall asleep. One of the first things that patients tell me is they say, Dr. Breus, I can't turn off my brain when I get in bed at night. That is the single biggest complaint that I hear from my patients who can't fall asleep. It's that overactive mind, that ruminative thought that is just driving. And I know a lot of people out there listening are thinking, oh my gosh, he's talking about me. He's been in my bedroom. He kind of knows what's going on there. And the truth of the matter is that the good news is that you're not alone. That there are many people out there who are having this difficulty. So please don't feel isolated. But the even better news is that in my practice as a PhD, a non-prescribing PhD doctor, I use techniques that don't require pharmaceuticals, don't require things like benzodiazepines or non-benzodiazepine hypnotics or even antidepressants. My goal is to take people and not only teach them how to sleep better, but to give them specific techniques that are research-driven that can actually help them not only fall asleep, but to stay asleep.
Fantastic. So for everyone out there, just so you know, we have this knee-jerk response, and I unfortunately was part of this problem for many years before I declared myself as a holistic alternative regenerative medicine doctor. I was the guy writing scripts. It is very easy for a physician to write you prescription for a drug under the auspices that it's only going to be used for 1 or 2 nights. But how many times did people come back and said, that really helped me sleep? Can I have some more of that? Can I have some more of that?
I would say 100%.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what I alluded to before you were on, Dr. Breus. The people are up in arms about fentanyl and propofol and these types of hypnotic drugs that are not commonly prescribed.
No.
But so we lost Michael Jackson and we lost Prince. We lost 2 geniuses, musical geniuses. But what about those accidents that we see? What about those drugs, those benzodiazepines, and all the other sedative drugs that we immediately just knee-jerk to when we have a sleep disorder? What
Yep.
about that epidemic? People just aren't talking about that, so it's really, really gratifying for me to know that there are techniques out there that we can share and that you will be sharing in your upcoming book, The Power of When. And I assume in your other books that are already in print.
Yep, absolutely. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. Here's where the real problem lies, is 99% of internists, actually I would go as far as to say 100% of internists. Do you know the average amount of education that they get during medical school on sleep disorders?
Well, having been through that, I'd say it was pretty much zero. At least
Yeah.
back in my day, we didn't even have the poor surrogate for the sleep studies, which we've discussed in the past, are
Yeah,
somewhat disastrous. But we didn't even have those things. Those things were the bailiwick of universities back in the day when I
exactly.
was in medical school. Just
Here's
give them
what
a
the
drug,
answer
just
is.
give them some Valium. That was what we did.
Yep, that's exactly right. Here's what we've learned is in the last 30 to 40 years, the average medical school student gets approximately 2.5 to 3.5 hours of sleep training for their entire career. The entire career, okay? So, and there, by the way, there are 88 different sleep disorders. Can you believe that there are 88 different sleep disorders? So
Not a,
unless you decided to do a specialty, right, there's almost no way that as a general internist you're going to have hardly any education whatsoever. The good news is that number has increased to about 4.5 to 5 hours now. So we've doubled it, which is great, but it's still not nearly enough. And so what ends up happening is you go into your internist office and you're talking to him, and we call this, by the way, we call insomnia the door handle diagnosis, because as the physician is got his hand on the door and they're about to leave, they casually say, "Oh, and how are you sleeping?" And all of a sudden the floodgates open up and the patient starts telling, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. I haven't been sleeping very well." And people are ashamed. It's very interesting. People think they're supposed to be macho and be able to get by on 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 hours of sleep. Let me tell you something. There's nothing macho about getting by on 3.5 hours of sleep. It's dangerous. Driving a vehicle, God forbid. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen there. So what we see here is we have a physician group that has not been well educated, and then not only that, we've got patients who've got massive problems. Roughly 30%, that's 30% of people out there are suffering from insomnia in some form on any given night, with 10% of those people being chronic. There's 350 million people approximately in the United States. That's 35 million people who chronically have bad sleep. That's over 90 million that are suffering from some level of sleeplessness at any given time. So what happens? It's much easier to write a script than it is to really teach people what's going on. Very interesting, about 3 weeks ago, the National Academy of Physicians put forth a consensus statement that said that they would prefer that physicians not prescribe sleep aids as the first line of defense for sleep issues, but rather to use something called CBT, which stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. This is one of the techniques that I use in my practice that's very, very effective. What we do with this technique is we actually discover that people have thoughts about sleep that are inaccurate. A perfect example of one of those is, if I don't get my 8 hours of sleep, I'm not going to be able to function the next day. Right? Now, while it would be ideal if you got the amount of sleep that you need, by the way, 8 hours, we're pretty sure 8 hours is a myth. Most people need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. That sleep need number changes with age, with medical frailty. We know that genetically some people need even less sleep. I've been a 6.5 to 7 hour sleeper almost my entire life. My wife, she needs 9. So understanding your sleep need is very, very important. Understanding, are you sleep deprived, is very, very important. And unfortunately, you hit the nail on the head. There are just far too many people out there who are willing to write a prescription. Because here's what happens, is if you have a sleeping problem and somebody writes you a prescription, you now have 2 problems. You have a sleeping problem and a pill problem, and that's not getting you very far.
Right. Well, the other interesting thing is, and we probably won't have time to delve too deeply into this, but there's all those funny stories back in the day, about the 5 anesthesiologists who flew to Paris on Halcyon, woke
Yep.
up and completely missed the conference and forgot why they were there. Clearly, the benzodiazepines and other sleep drugs affect the cycles of sleep and
Yes.
affect the representation of those cycles. So even though you may be actually sleeping longer, you're not necessarily getting the proper cyclic sleep that you need to have the maximum benefit, and in some cases you can actually have detriment. So I think it's important to, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would argue that pharmaceutical-induced sleep is very, very different. That, that's being unconscious, and there's a difference between being unconscious and sleeping, right? A lot of people think those two things are the same. I would actually argue that they're very different, especially when you look at something like benzodiazepine use. So for folks out there who may have heard this word benzodiazepine, this is a particular class of drugs originally used for anxiety, but it helps calm people down. And it's anything with the letters PAM on the back of it. The trade names are things like you said, Valium, Xanax, Restoril, things like that. And here's what we know about these drugs. Number one, they decrease respiratory drive. So if you happen to have sleep apnea and you're misdiagnosed and somebody gives you a benzodiazepine, you just put yourself, or actually your physician, just put you in a very situation. We know that benzodiazepines actually shorten stage 3 and 4 sleep. Now, we were talking about anti-aging earlier in the talk, and let me tell you something. There's some great studies to show that stages 3 and 4 sleep is your beauty sleep. That is the sleep that makes you look good. That is the physically restorative sleep. And guess what? Benzodiazepines knock that out. So you got a sleep problem. I give you a benzodiazepine. You don't even get real sleep. You get unconscious sleep. Oh, and by the way, if you keep taking them, you're not going to look very good.
Yeah, and as you said, then you have a pill problem. I can tell you that getting people off of benzodiazepines is very, very difficult. It can be done, but the patient has to understand it's a very inconvenient problem to have, because it means weeks, if not months, of some disruption and fatigue and that kind of thing. Incidentally, that is why I guess invented is probably the wrong word, but concocted this product, Sleep Wizard. I'm going to tell you a really quick story about that. Again, it's not a drug.
Please.
It's a non-habit forming, non-benzodiazepine. But a friend of mine used to make the trip from Portland and was always jet lagged when he got here, and he would always say, hey, can you prescribe me some Valium or Librium, or then it was Halcyon, then it was one of the shorter acting versions that don't end in PAM but pretty much do the same thing.
Or something.
Yeah, you name it. I mean, it was always, can I have a drug?
Prosom, they're all out there.
Prosom's another one, Sonata, you know, they're endless. The pharmaceutical industry is just amazing at coming up with different versions of these sorts of things if it knows that it can sell them. And I was using the earlier analogy of how hormone balancing was frowned upon, even looked upon as quackery when I started back in the turn of the century, 2000, that is, not 1900, but 2000. And now we have patches and we have creams, and now it's all okay because the pharmaceutical industry can sell it to you. So same thing with the sleep stuff. So I repeatedly refused his overtures, and I said, there is something I can give you, something I concoct myself. And I gave it to him. He slept really, really well. He came over the next day. He said, that was amazing. I don't think I'm going to need it again. I might. Can I have one or two more? I gave him 2 more. He was not jet lagged for the rest of his 2-week stay, obviously. He got out of it very, very quickly, did not need any drugs. And thus, the product called Sleep Wizard was born. Not because I even had any inclination, but he said to me, you ought to sell that stuff. You know what? That's a really good idea, and that's how Sleep Wizard came about. And there's a pro and there's a con. As you said, we don't like to induce, and I never encourage people to take anything, but it is not habit forming. It is not a benzodiazepine. It is made out of all natural ingredients, and most people find that it really does help reset that sleep cycle. And it's very rare that someone needs to even go through a whole month's supply of it. We usually say 3 or 4 nights. That said, people love to have it around just in case. I keep it around for that purpose. I rarely have to take it, but when I do, it surely beats the heck out of any of those other drugs we were talking about.
Well,
so I want to... Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, when you look at even some of the OTC sleep aids that are out there, where people are going to the Walgreens and going to that one section of the store and picking up something that has a PM on the back end of it, you have to be careful because, everything that has a PM is just got Benadryl added to it, right? So diphenhydramine. And we know that this is an antihistamine, and we know that that compound was actually built to last for about 12 hours.
Right.
So if you take something that was built to last for 12 hours, I got a news flash for you. It's going to last for 12 hours. And so, if you go to bed at 10 and you take one of these and you've got to get up at 6:30 the next day, you're going to have a hard time waking up. And that's because of the way the compound was built. The Sleep Wizard clearly sounds like something that was not intended to be used like that, was not built like that. So of course you're going to have a lot better, time with it. I wanted to get back to the slide where it talks about define sleep hygiene for us, because
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. Perfect.
I think that's a term that a lot of people have heard in the vernacular, and I wanted to, see if I could help identify that for people. And so when you hear the term sleep hygiene, what that means is that means all the things that you do during the day or just before you go to sleep that could actually have an effect on your sleep. Some of the big ones: caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, your sleep schedule, exposure to light, exposure to environmental toxins, things of that nature. That's what we consider to be sleep hygiene. So many times if you go to your physician, they may give you a piece of paper or a piece of content that says, okay, here are the 10 things that you need to not do because this is better sleep hygiene. I'm not really thrilled with the word hygiene because it makes it sound like your sleep is unclean or something like that.
Exactly. I don't like it either.
I'd rather talk about sleep coaching or sleep wellness or something along those lines. But
Sure.
I've created a very small 5-step plan that I think everybody out there could use, and everybody can start it tonight, that could be very helpful for their sleep. So if I may, step 1 is to keep a consistent schedule. The more consistent your schedule is, the more your internal biological clock or those circadian rhythms will actually stay in line. Most people don't understand, but sleep has 2 very distinct systems that cause that level of unconscious sleep. One is a sleep drive, so kind of like hunger. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. I eat something and that drive dissipates. The same holds true with sleep. There's a buildup of something in your brain which is called adenosine. So adenosine is a cellular byproduct. So when a cell grabs some glucose, uses it up, and then spits something out, the thing that they spit out, at least partly, is something called adenosine. This builds up in your brain. It makes you feel more and more sleepy. Oddly enough, if you look at the molecular structure of adenosine and you look at the molecular structure of caffeine, they're literally one molecule off, which is kind of interesting. And so what happens is caffeine fits into that receptor site in the brain very easily and prevents us from feeling sleepy, but the sleepiness is still there. That's why after you burn through your caffeine, you get this overwhelming, crash, if you will. So keeping a regular sleep cycle, what that does is that allows for that buildup to occur in a natural and slow process. Also, it keeps your circadian rhythms in line, which is that biological clock that makes you hungry at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, also makes you feel sleepy approximately 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So have one sleep schedule and stick to it, which means even on the weekends. Now, there's a caveat here, right? So if normally during the week you're going to bed at a particular time, and on the weekends you want to maybe go out to dinner, maybe go see a movie, go out with some friends, and you stay up a little later, I don't have a problem with that. But what I will tell you is I still want you to wake up at your same weekday wake-up time. Why is that? Because your anchor for your circadian rhythm is your wake-up time. And so if you want to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning and you normally get up at 6:30, you guessed it, I'm going to ask you to get up around 6:30 to keep your circadian rhythms functioning. That's going to be critical. Very, very important. So number 1, pick a sleep schedule and stick to it. Number 2 is to stop caffeine by approximately 2 p.m. Why do I choose 2 p.m.? The average adult, it takes between 8 and 10 hours to remove half of the caffeine from your system. So if you stop at 2, half of it should be out of your system by about 10, and that should be enough so that it doesn't affect your ability to fall or hopefully stay asleep. So step number 2 is stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step number 3 has to do with alcohol. I like a good scotch. I like a glass of wine. I don't mind having it with dinner, but you need to be careful. If the human body, it takes approximately 1 hour per alcoholic beverage consumed. And we know that alcohol, while it may make you feel sleepy, actually keeps you out of the deeper stages of sleep. Believe it or not, that lack of deep sleep is about half of the reason that you have a hangover. The other half is dehydration. So what I'm asking my patients to do is to stop drinking alcohol approximately 3 hours before their bedtime. That gives you enough opportunity to have had 1, 2 glasses of wine with dinner and be able to still enjoy them and get a good night's rest. Step number 4 has to do with exercise. I'm a huge fan of exercise. I know we have a lot of athletes that are listening in. I've actually helped create sleep-related programs just for elite Olympic athletes before. Very, very interesting stuff. Sleep is the new secret weapon, by the way, for almost all sports stars out there. But exercising daily is the easiest way to improve your overall quality of sleep. Easiest way. However, there are some people where if they exercise too close to bedtime, it can actually give them energy. If you're the type of person that feels more energetic after you've had a cardiovascular workout, exercising in the evening is probably not a good idea for you. However, there are some people who get kind of a calming, relaxing feeling after exercise. If you're one of those people, then exercising in the evening might not be such a bad idea. So step number 4 is if exercise gives you energy, you want to have stopped exercising approximately 4 hours before bed. And my very last tip, which is going to seem silly, but I promise you it works well, is every single morning when you wake up, go outside and get 15 minutes of direct sunlight if you possibly can. When sunlight comes in and hits the optic nerve, it bounces around and triggers these things called melanopsin cells. Melanopsin sends a signal to the brain to stop the melatonin faucet, if you will. Remember, melatonin is that key that starts the engine for sleep. It's not everything that you need to know about sleep or have done about sleep, but it is one of the most critical factors. So what I'm oftentimes telling people is we need that melatonin faucet off in the mornings so that way we don't get that morning fogginess feeling. So by walking outside, have a nice glass of room temperature water to rehydrate yourself, because don't forget you breathe out approximately 1 liter of fluid while you're asleep. So hydrate, get some sunlight, start your day off right.
Awesome. That's great stuff, Dr. Breus. Thank you so much for that. I think what we're going to do now is we'll move to the next slide and we'll open up for some questions so the audience has a chance to ask the sleep doctor, Dr. Michael Breus, what to do. And actually, Patrick, let's move to the next slide as well, because I want to make sure everyone sees that we are having a special on Sleep Wizard tonight, free shipping when you subscribe, and the special code is SLEEP. So let's open it up for questions, and we'll parse them out between you and I, Dr. Breus, if that's okay with you. The aging-related stuff I'll deal with, and the sleep-related stuff, which I think is going to be the bulk of it, I'm going to let you handle that one. And thank you again, incredible stuff. I promised the audience 7 secrets, so I'm just going to add 1 or 2 real quick things. Number 1, you can keep your room a little cooler. Pretty much everybody knows that. And also, I have a thing about eating late at night. I really think that for all kinds of reasons, metabolic healing being one of them, it's preferable not to eat within 2 or 3 hours of sleep as well. Just like you pretty much said, same thing with alcohol. If you time your alcohol consumption with your eating, you are probably going to do just fine that way.
Yeah,
okay,
I agree with both of those suggestions, by the way.
Thank you. I'm glad, and again, I'm keeping it simple because I'm not going to. I've got a lot to learn, and that's why I'm so excited that you're here. You weren't around. Yeah, you weren't around back in 2000 when we first did the whole A4M thing and AMG thing that followed. So don't be surprised if I tap into you to get you to come talk to our doctors about it.
Of course, I'd love to.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Patrick, any questions for us? If not, I'm going to ask Dr. Breus a question.
Sure, so I've got one from Cheryl here, and she says that a prescription is the only way she can get more than 3 or 4 hours worth of sleep at nighttime. Which is the lesser of the 2 evils, taking the prescription or losing the sleep?
This is a great question. Yeah, this is a great question, and I get it all the time. So first of all, do not, I repeat, do not stop taking your sleep aid without the expressed permission of the prescribing physician that has prescribed it to you. Many times these sleep aids take a very long period of time for you to taper off of, so never, ever, ever go cold turkey off of a sleep aid. That's number 1. Number 2 is what I would say is it's okay that this is your scenario, because what you need to do now is you need to work with a behavioral sleep specialist. So these are people trained like myself who can take somebody who is currently taking their sleep aid and be able to extend the amount of sleep that they get, number 1, if possible, which usually it is. I haven't actually come across a case where I haven't been able to help people sleep at least a little bit better, and then slowly taper their medication to get them off. So you're not in a bad place. Don't worry about it. What I would say, though, is if you go to www.sleepcenters.org, there's a map. And you click on the map with your state, and it will tell you where all of the Accredited sleep centers are in your state, and then almost every accredited sleep center has a behavioral sleep specialist like myself that's associated with the lab. They may not be at the lab every day, but they are associated with the lab, and they'll be able to help guide you through the process of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia and something called sleep restriction, which is another technique that I use to great success. So I don't want you to worry, but I would tell you that it's time for you to go to sleepcenters.org.
Fantastic question, fantastic answer. Okay, Patrick, some more good stuff for us.
Sure. I've got a question from Shannon, which actually ties into another question that was just asked. But she'd like to know, it's been mentioned that 7 to 9 hours was the optimum amount of sleep. How do you know what the optimum amount of sleep is for yourself? And
Great
Lenny
question.
would like to know, is there such a thing as getting too much sleep? The two of those are kind of related, so we'll see if we can tackle them at the same time.
So let me answer the second one first. So is there a possibility of you getting too much sleep? The answer is yes. If you find that you require more than 9 hours of sleep a night, you may not have a sleep quantity issue. You may have a sleep quality issue. When patients come to see me and they say, I get a ton of sleep and I don't feel refreshed in the morning, I'm starting to worry about things like sleep apnea, narcolepsy, restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movements, the list goes on. That's where a sleep test might, a visit to a sleep laboratory might actually be not such a bad idea. When we're talking about how much sleep does a person need, here's the thing that I can tell you is everybody's sleep need is individual. As I said before, I'm a 6.5 hour guy. My wife is an 8.5 hour girl. How do we know when to sleep? I'm going to teach everybody how to figure out what your appropriate bedtime is. When was the last time somebody told you to go to bed when you were like 8, 10 years old, right? But what happens is we all know that this little scenario occurs. I promised myself I was going to get in bed at 10 o'clock tonight. I got on the computer just to answer one last email, and I look up and it's 12:30, right? That happens to everybody. So here's what I'm going to ask people to do. Number one is we all know what your socially determined wake-up time is. And what I mean by that is what time do you have to get up for kids, work, school, what have you. So let's pick a number that is pretty common for most people, which is 6:30 in the morning. We now know that the average sleep cycle is approximately 90 minutes long, and we know that the average individual has 5 of those sleep cycles. So 5 times 90 is 450, which is approximately 7.5 hours worth of sleep. So if your normal wake-up time is 6:30, if you counted back 7.5 hours, that puts you at about 11 o'clock. That is your new bedtime. If you go to bed at 11, wake up at 6:30, and you do this for 7 to 10 days, you should be able to start waking up without an alarm. If you wake up a half an hour early, then guess what? That means you don't need as much sleep, and you can go to bed a half an hour later. If after 7 to 10 days you still need to wake up with an alarm, then you need to go to bed a half an hour earlier to see. The average individual should be able to wake up without an alarm after they've been sleeping for their sleep need number amount of time. Does that make sense to everybody?
I think it's a fantastic explanation, and it gives everybody something they can do tonight. So there's another secret. That'll be our 8th secret for the audience tonight.
Oh, and by the way, a super little hack that I've used is I have people using their alarm clock in when to tell them to wake up, when to tell them to go to sleep. So set your alarm for what your new bedtime is. So if in our previous example, if you wake up at 6:30 and your bedtime is 11 o'clock, I want you to set your alarm in your bedroom for 10:45. That way you have to walk in there to turn it off, and now you're like, I got 15 minutes before I need to get in bed. I'm going to go do my hygiene activities, brush my teeth, wash my face, and then maybe 5 to 10 minutes for some level of relaxation, whether that's prayer, whether that's stretching, whether that's deep breathing, whatever it is that you do that helps you settle in at night. Go ahead and do that, and then lights off around 11:05, and let's see what happens.
Fantastic. It's a reverse alarm psychology there. Great stuff. Patrick, what else do you have for us?
We've had this question from a bunch of different people, but the gist of it is, how do you both feel about taking a low-dose melatonin every night, and is that okay to do as you get older?
So those are you want to go first? Do you want me to go?
Yeah, I will. I mean, I have mixed emotions about that. I think we probably, and maybe you can answer it more directly, but I think we're still looking at things like melanopause and what does it mean. There's a separation between cause and effect in aging. Now, again, I'll refer back to hormone replacement. It was noticed that we all go through pauses, menopause, andropause, etc., and by somatopause, and by fixing those, the premise was that you would de-age. At the time that those premises were advanced, we didn't have the cellular technology to look at what was going on. We now do, and we find out that they're correct. So inherently, it would make sense to me that if you can document, or you can see the clinical signs of melanopause, which is pretty common as people age. And again, it varies. It's not the same. Somebody may get it when they're 50. Somebody may not get it until they're 80. But melatonin, it's got so many other benefits, antioxidant benefits, that I think if you're going to use something on a regular basis, I think it's a great thing. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that with proper sleep hygiene, the things that we just got done talking about, you probably wouldn't need to use anything on a regular basis unless you have some really, really clear-cut deficiency.
So I completely agree with you. So here's the thing that we know is around age 55 or 60, we know that the pineal gland starts to, or the hypothalamus in particular, starts to slow down, and we know that the melatonin production begins to slow. So in some of my patients that are in that age range, there is an opportunity to use some level of melatonin in them fairly regularly because, again, there appears to be a deficiency. But the thing to remember about melatonin is not a sleep initiator. Melatonin is a sleep regulator. So melatonin only affects the circadian rhythm I was talking about before. It doesn't affect the sleep drive. I can guarantee you that if you go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, and do my 4 other steps, number one, you will more than likely not need to be able to have to take melatonin. The bigger problem with melatonin is 95% of it is sold in an overdosage format. The appropriate dose, based on studies out of MIT, show it between 0.5 and 1 milligram. And also, by the way, it takes almost 90 minutes for melatonin to reach plasma concentration levels for it to have any sort of effect on sleep in general. So people should be taking it almost an hour and a half before bed at the 0.5 milligram or 1 milligram dose if it is in fact something that you're going to need. Now, the question that you want to ask me is, well, Michael, when do I need it? So we know that melatonin works really well for people who are shift workers. We know that melatonin works really well for people who are experiencing jet lag. And we know that it works really well in seniors at low dosages. So those are the 3 kind of scenarios where I have a tendency to think melatonin is not a bad thing to be using on a fairly regular basis. But if you're using melatonin every single night right before you go to sleep, here's what I'm here to tell you is it's probably more of a placebo effect than anything else if it's really helping you sleep.
That's great information, and just by way of that, the dosage in Sleep Wizard is exactly 1/2 milligram. So
see, so you're right on the money.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, again, personal experience helps dictate that, but it's a great answer. And, there are other uses for melatonin that people may run
into. Of course.
It's actually been used in cancer situations, but that's not what we're talking about here. And I think really the point to make is following Dr. Breus's 5 steps, probably 85 to 90% of people who are having non-physiologic, non-disease problems will be cured. The problem is this: we all want a quick fix. It may take a couple nights. It may take a couple weeks even.
Yes.
Everybody wants to be fixed immediately, hence the pills. So if you folks just can be a little bit patient with these steps and actually apply them, much like you would anything else. I mean, why do most things not work? Why do we have new diet books every year? Not because the old diets didn't work. In some cases they didn't, but in many cases because people only stuck with them for 3 or 4 days. Same thing with the exercise programs. It's well documented the number of gym memberships in December and January versus the actual number of people who go. Gyms make a living out of people who don't go. So this is the sort of societal behavior issues we have to fix. The consequences of becoming addicted to pills, the consequences of crashing your car or ruining your family life or making a bad decision at work or not performing well on a test are much, much greater than spending a few weeks, especially now that summer's here, taking good care of yourself. And this is what we're trying to get across to people. This is a lifestyle modification. It's part of a pyramid. It's right up there with nutrition and exercise, in my view, as far as longevity is concerned. I lecture on those things all the time. And, I've been trying to lecture on sleep, but of course I don't have your eloquence about it, Michael, but I have my own personal experiences, and you know, between the two of us, I think we can make an impact on this. Let's wrap it up. Let's say good night to everybody, and thank you all for being on. It looks like many people stuck out the whole thing. You can send your questions into doc@drdavesbest.com, or we'll provide some other places where you can send questions. If you have ideas for future seminars, or you'd like to have Dr. Breus back, as I certainly would, send us an email and let us know so that we can bring Dr. Michael Breus, the sleep doctor, back. Oh, I almost forgot. Dr. Breus, you have to tell our audience about your upcoming summit, which I get to be part of.
Absolutely. So we have a really exciting thing. And for people out there who have been to summits before, this is not going to be your normal summit. The good news here is, or odd news to me, is nobody's ever done a summit surrounding sleep. So what I've done is we've gotten almost 35 speakers together, all who have all kinds of different ideas about sleep, and I'm interviewing them as the host, and we really have had a blast. Of course, Dr. Dave, you are an integral part of that, and I thank you again for being part of my Sleep Summit. But I encourage people, if you got anything out of our talks today, you should absolutely check it out. You'll be able to register soon at sleepsuccesssummit.com. And we're very excited about it. We've got some great free giveaways, a tremendous amount of information from some of the top experts in the world.
And if you're on my email list, you'll be getting reminders from time to time about this. I'll be sending out reminders about Dr. Breus's Sleep Success Summit. And thank you, Dr. Michael Breus, for being on tonight. The Sleep Doctor, for enlightening us. It's been great as always, and I've learned a lot, and I look forward to our next conversation. There's a lot we can do to help people get a better night's sleep, and that alone would be so integral to their health span, and in my opinion, their lifespan.
Well,
so
it's been an honor for me, Dave, to be part of your show, so thank you very much for having me on. And for all those folks out there, you should feel very lucky to have Dr. Dave in your corner, that's for sure.
It's a pleasure, Michael, and we'll look forward to doing it again. Okay, everybody, good night. Have a great night's sleep. We hope you have the best night's sleep ever, and don't forget Sleep Wizard on special tonight. So we'll see you again. Our next teleconference, by the way, is scheduled for June 27th. I have as a special guest Juan Carlos Santana, not the guitar player, but the world-famous functional training expert. J.C. Santana has trained everyone from mixed martial artists to Olympians to football players, hockey players, and I can tell you that as somebody who's interested in remaining physically active as I get older, this is an absolute fantastic resource. So once again, we'll be blessed. And again, thank you, Dr. Michael Breus. Good night to everybody. Get a good night's sleep tonight.
Sweet dreams.